Hey guys, Miss DeLitto here. We're going to take a look at ratios of fractions and specifically unit rate of fractions. And I'm going to go over the two models that are most commonly used, which are the ratio table model and the division method. We're going to look at example 2, which is a recipe calls for 1 1/4 cups of chicken broth for every 3/4 cans of diced tomatoes. How many cups of chicken broth should you use for 1 can of diced tomatoes? So we're going to start with our ratio table method, and we're going to draw our actual ratio table. And anytime we draw a ratio table, the first thing that we want to add is our labels. So we're going to add cups of chicken broth, we're going to call it CB, and then cans of diced tomatoes, or DT. And it doesn't matter where you add those labels. What does matter is that the appropriate information goes in the appropriate spots. So what is the important information? So we know that a recipe calls for 1 1/4 cups of chicken broth for every 3/4 cans of diced tomatoes. I want to know how many cups of chicken broth should I use for 1 can of diced tomatoes. Now we can start plugging some stuff into our table. So we know that for 1 1/4 cups of chicken broth, I'm going to use 3/4 of a can of diced tomatoes. And I also know that I ultimately want to figure out how many cups of chicken broth do I need for 1 can of diced tomatoes. As we talked about in class, in order to find one whole of something when we know a fraction of something, we can multiply by our reciprocal. So in this case, the reciprocal of 3/4 is 4/3. And if you need that proof, 3 times 4 is 12, 4 times 3 is 12, and 12 over 12 simplifies to 1. And we're going to need to do the same thing to our cups of chicken broth. Multiply by that 4/3. Before we can multiply fractions, we do need to make sure we change any mixed numbers to improper fractions. So to do that, we're going to do 1 times 4 is 4, plus 1 is 5. So our improper fraction for 1 1/4 is 5/4. We're going to multiply that by 4/3. 5 times 4 is 20. 4 times 3 is 12. We know we can simplify from here. We know that 12 goes into 20 one whole time, and we would need 8 more out of 12. We can still simplify here because I know I can divide both 8 and 12 by 4 to get 1 2/3. So we need 1 2/3 cups of chicken broth for 1 can of diced tomatoes. We do need to make sure we pull this answer out of our table and actually label our answer. And we're going to do that saying 1 2/3 cups of broth per can of tomatoes. The next method that we're going to look at is our division method. So when we look at the division method, it's really important for us to start by thinking about what information we're being asked to find. I'm being asked to find how many cups of chicken broth do I need per can of diced tomatoes. So I'm really looking for cups per can. And as we discussed in class, to find this, we're looking at cups divided by cans. Now we can take the numbers associated with cups and cans and divide them. So 1 1/4 cups of chicken broth divided by 3/4 of a can of diced tomatoes. Again, we know we cannot multiply or divide any mixed numbers without changing them to improper fractions. So we're going to do that first. 1 1/4 becomes 5/4. And we're dividing by 3/4. As a reminder, when we divide our fractions, we keep that acronym KCF in mind, where we keep that first fraction the same. So we're keeping 5/4 the same. We are changing our sign to multiplication, and we are flipping our second fraction to 4/3. Ultimately, this ends up being the same exact math statement that we looked at in our first example. And now we can go and multiply. 5 times 4 is 20. 4 times 3 is 12. And as we saw in our last example, this simplifies to 1 2/3. So again, we find that we need 1 2/3 cups of broth per can of tomatoes. Hopefully this helped. I'll see you guys in class tomorrow.